Right now, as you're watching this, Americans collectively owe $18.8 trillion in debt. That is a record high. It has never been higher in the history of this country. And here's what makes that number truly disturbing. It's not the total that should scare you. It's what that debt is being used for. Because there are two types of debt in America, and they are being used by two completely different groups of people to produce two completely opposite outcomes. The first type is destroying the financial lives of millions of ordinary Americans, quietly, slowly, and with a smile on its face. The second type is being used by the wealthy to build generational fortunes, pay almost no taxes, and get richer every single month, including while they sleep. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Both groups are going into debt. The wealthy are not debt-free. In fact, the wealthiest people in this country often carry more debt than the average American, by a lot. The difference is not the amount. The difference is not the interest rate. The difference is one thing, and once I show it to you, you will never look at debt the same way again. My name is Danny. Let's get into it. Let me show you the real picture of American debt in 2026, because the numbers are more important than any headline you've read. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, total U.S. household debt hit $18.8 trillion at the end of 2025. That breaks down like this: $13.2 trillion in mortgages, $1.67 trillion in auto loans, $1.66 trillion in student loans, and $1.28 trillion in credit card debt alone, the highest credit card balance ever recorded since tracking began in 1999. The average American household carries $105,056 in total debt, and the average credit card balance for someone who carries a balance sits between $6,500 and $6,800. Now here's where it gets important. The average credit card APR right now is 20.97% on all accounts and 23.77% on new card offers. That means if you carry that average $6,500 balance and make only minimum payments, you will spend more than a decade paying it off, and you will pay back well over $11,000 in total for a $6,500 balance. That's 70% more than you borrowed, gone to the bank. But here's the question nobody stops to ask: what is the bank doing with the interest you're paying them? They're lending it to someone else at a better rate to buy an asset that generates income, which is exactly what I'm about to show you. Because 61% of Americans who have credit card debt have been in debt for at least a year, 22% don't think they will ever pay it off, and 33% are now using credit cards to pay for basic daily expenses, groceries, utilities, childcare. This is not a debt problem. This is a type of debt problem. I want to give you the clearest possible way to think about this, because I think most people have heard the phrase good debt versus bad debt and filed it away as a concept without actually internalizing what it means in practice. So let me show you two people, same income, same credit score, same year. Person A borrows $50,000. They use $20,000 to buy a car, new, financed at 7.5% over 60 months. They put $15,000 on home renovations, new kitchen, updated bathrooms, things that feel like investments, but that real estate data shows rarely return their full cost. They finance a vacation on a credit card at 22% APR. They have a personal loan for the remaining amount. Every dollar of that debt is pointed at something that either loses value immediately, provides no future income, or costs them interest with nothing coming in on the other side. Person B also borrows $50,000. They use it as a down payment on a rental property worth $250,000. 5-to-1 leverage on the bank's money. The rental income covers the mortgage and generates $600 in monthly positive cash flow. The property appreciates. The tenant is paying down the mortgage principal, and person B gets to deduct the mortgage interest and depreciation from their taxable income. Same debt amount, completely opposite outcomes. As Howard Dvorkin, a CPA and financial advisor, put it plainly, more than 7 in 10 Americans are in debt. The wealthiest aren't in debt, they use debt. The distinction is not semantic, it is the entire ballgame. The wealthy use debt to acquire assets. Assets that appreciate in value, assets that generate cash flow, assets that produce more income than the debt costs to carry. The average American uses debt to acquire liabilities, things that lose value, things that require ongoing payment, things that produce nothing. Same tool, two completely different directions it gets pointed. I don't want to give you theory. I want to show you the actual mechanics, the specific strategies that wealthy individuals use, so you can understand exactly how this works. Strategy 1. Leverage on appreciating assets. This is the foundational move. Instead of using cash to buy something, you put a smaller amount down and borrow the rest, but only to buy something that goes up in value and generates income while it does. Real estate is the clearest example. If you have $100,000 in cash and you buy a $100,000 property outright and it goes up 7% in a year, you made $7,000. That's a 7% return on your money. But if you use that same $100,000 as a down payment on a $500,000 property, which a bank will do with a standard 20% down mortgage, and that property goes up 7%, you made $35,000 on your $100,000. That's a 35% return on the same money. The debt didn't cost you money. The debt multiplied your money because the rental income covers the mortgage payment and the bank's money is working for you on an asset 5 times the size of what you could afford on your own. Strategy 2. Borrowing against assets instead of selling them. This is the move that almost nobody in the middle class knows about, and it's one of the primary reasons why wealthy people pay so little in taxes. Here's how it works. Let's say you own $2 million worth of stock that you bought years ago. If you sell that stock to raise cash, you owe capital gains tax, potentially 20% or more on the gains. That's a $400,000 tax bill before you've spent a dollar. But if instead you walk into a bank and use that $2 million in stock as collateral for a loan, the bank lends you $1 million at, say, 5% interest. You now have $1 million in cash. You owe no capital gains tax because you didn't sell anything. You pay $50,000 a year in interest, which may be tax deductible depending on how the loan is used. You take that $1 million and deploy it into another asset that generates more than 5%. The spread between what you earn and what you pay is pure profit, built entirely on debt. Elon Musk does this routinely with his Tesla shares. Jeff Bezos has done it with Amazon stock. This isn't a loophole. It's a legal, documented strategy that wealthy people use at scale and that almost no middle-class Americans know exists. Strategy 3. Interest rate arbitrage. Wealthy individuals consistently find the gap between what debt costs and what assets earn, and they exploit it deliberately. A simple example: borrow against real estate holdings at 5% APR. Invest the borrowed capital into treasury bonds or dividend-paying stocks yielding 6% or 7%. The 1 to 2% spread is pure profit, and it's profit made entirely with borrowed money. As one senior wealth advisor explained it, they might put up their real estate holdings as collateral on a loan at 4% interest, then invest that money in government bonds at 4.75%. They're then guaranteed to make money. The asset base stays intact. The debt is self-funding. The wealth compounds continuously. Strategy for mensbritikens roer and spor, using inflation as a silent partner. This is perhaps the most underappreciated strategy of all, and it's one that works specifically because inflation exists. When you borrow $500,000 at a fixed interest rate to buy a property, you are locking in that debt in today's dollars, but you will repay that debt over 30 years in future dollars. Dollars that are worth less because of inflation. Meanwhile, the rent you charge goes up with inflation every year. The property value rises with inflation, but your mortgage payment stays exactly the same. Inflation, which destroys the purchasing power of cash savings, actually helps the person carrying productive debt. The real value of what you owe decreases year after year, while the real value of your asset holds or grows. The bank effectively subsidizes your wealth building through a mechanism most people never think about. Now here's where I want to be completely honest with you, because most videos on this topic make it sound easier than it is. Using debt strategically requires capital, credit, and patience. You can't take out a personal loan at 18% APR and call it good debt because you're hoping to invest it in something. That's how people lose everything. But there are 3 concrete switches, things you can change about how you relate to debt, that apply regardless of where you're starting from. Switch 1. Audit every dollar of debt you currently carry. Get a piece of paper. Write down every debt you have. Next to each one, write one of 2 things: consuming or producing. Consuming means this debt is pointed at something that loses value and generates no income. Car loans for depreciating vehicles, credit card balances for daily expenses, personal loans for things you've already spent, all consuming. Producing means this debt is pointed at an asset that either appreciates, generates income, or builds future earning capacity. A mortgage on a rental property, a business loan for equipment that expands revenue, student debt that genuinely increased your income. Producing. Most people have never actually looked at their debt this way. The moment you categorize it honestly, your financial priorities become crystal clear. Every consuming debt is a fire to put out. Every future borrowing decision should be evaluated against the same question: does this produce or consume? Switch to redirect your next raise or windfall toward producing debt, not consumption. This is where the actual behavior change happens. When income goes up, whether from a raise, a bonus, a side hustle, or a tax refund, most people immediately expand their lifestyle. They upgrade the car, they take a nicer vacation, they buy things they've been putting off. The switch is this: before any lifestyle upgrade, ask what producing asset that money could help you acquire, even a modest amount. A $5,000 emergency fund in a high-yield savings account is better than a $5,000 credit card balance at 22%. A $10,000 down payment contribution toward a rental property in 3 years starts with $10,000 not spent on things that don't compound. The wealthy don't become wealthy because they earn more. They become wealthy because when money comes in, the first question they ask is, where does this work? Not, what do I get to buy? Switch. 3. Improve your credit score as a strategic priority. This one sounds basic, but the implications are enormous. The wealthy borrow at favorable rates because they have pristine credit and massive collateral. They pay 4 to 5% on the same borrowed money that costs the average American 20 to 23% on a credit card. That gap, 4% versus 22%, is the difference between debt that builds wealth and debt that destroys it. The same borrowed $10,000 and at 4% costs $400 a year in interest. At 22%, it costs $2,200. On a $50,000 debt, that's $18,000 a year in interest versus $2,000. Every percentage point, you reduce your borrowing costs by improving your credit score, paying down high interest balances, and building a track record is a real, measurable step toward being able to use debt the way the wealthy do. I have to give you this part because it matters. Debt amplifies outcomes in both directions. If the asset you borrowed to buy goes up, leverage multiplies your gain. If it goes down, leverage multiplies your loss. The 2008 financial crisis was not caused by people borrowing money. It was caused by people borrowing money to buy assets that were overvalued with no cash flow to service the debt when things went wrong. There are 3 rules that separate strategic debt from dangerous debt. First, the asset you borrow to acquire must generate enough income to cover the debt service on its own, without you subsidizing it from your paycheck. If the rental property doesn't cash flow, it's not a strategic investment, it's a speculative bet. Second, never borrow to invest in something you don't understand. The wealthy who borrow against their Tesla shares understand Tesla. They understand the risk. Borrowing money to invest in something because someone on the internet told you it's going up is not leverage. It's gambling with borrowed capital. Third, maintain liquidity. The worst thing that can happen with leveraged assets is being forced to sell them at the wrong time because you don't have cash to cover an emergency. Before you use any debt strategically, have a cash reserve that keeps you stable through a downturn. Debt is a tool. Tools can build things. Tools can also cause serious damage when used without proper understanding. Let me bring this back to where we started. Americans owe $18.8 trillion. That number is not the problem. The problem is that the overwhelming majority of that $18.8 trillion is pointed at things that lose value, generate no income, and make banks richer at the expense of the people carrying the debt. While 47% of credit card holders carry a balance at 20 to 23% APR, paying interest that disappears into the bank, the wealthy are borrowing at 4 to 6% against assets that return 8 to 15%. They are using the same fundamental mechanism in the opposite direction. The gap between these two groups is not talent, it's not luck, it's not even income. There are people earning $400,000 a year trapped in the first category, and people earning $60,000 a year quietly building real wealth in the second. It's a question of what you understand about how debt works. And now you understand it. The question I want you to sit with is this. Look at every debt you carry right now. Is it consuming or is it producing? That single question, answered honestly, is where the work starts. If this video shifted how you think about debt, subscribe. Every week I go deep on the financial patterns that actually build wealth, not quick tips, but the kind of understanding that holds up over decades. Drop a comment below. When you look at your debt right now, is most of it consuming or producing? Let's talk about it. I'll see you in the next one.